I know that I really respect Paul Auster's work as a fiction writer. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure that I can name all the books that I've read by him, okay? But I know if he comes out with something new, I want it, okay? And there's other authors like that. Now, yeah, there's certain titles that I was drawn to, but Michel Houellebecq he publishes in French, he's translated in English. One of the reasons I began to read him was that other authors in their blogs had said, that's what I'm reading now. Thinking, yes, I will review books, and I will review books that I think are primarily literary fiction, because they're more difficult to find in terms of, like, if you're finding genre, you can probably find the bestsellers, but literary fiction, you kind of have to look for it to find stuff that you really want or that you're attracted to. And so I'm into if you like this, you might also like me business. But I don't necessarily review new releases. I mean, I had a very serious review, Stendhal's Red and the Black. That was 1814, the first psychological novel, because there are interior monologues in the Red and the Black. Up to that point, writers didn't try that or do that or even know what it was. And it wasn't just the interior monologue of the main character. He was jumping inside other people's heads and telling you what they thought. He didn't know there was a rule. Okay. Stendhal was the one who said the people in Paris are smarter than the people. What? Not smarter. People in Paris, because they're not smarter. People in Paris are wiser than the people in the rural areas because they've read novels. Well, why is that? Because they can see the consequences of bad behavior.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a masterclass for you today. And we don't say that lightly, because our guest today is here to encourage us, to lead us on our journey as an author. You're going to learn a lot. You need to sit down right where you are, grab a pen and paper. You're a writer, so you're good at writing. You're going to make some notes today, because you're going to learn from Gerald as we talk through and learn much from our guest today, Gerald Everett Jones, here on the podcast. So happy to have him here. Gerald, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Dave, you're always so generous, and it's good to see you again.
It's good to have you here on the screen. I feel privileged and honored to have you here. Your well runneth deep with information and knowledge and wisdom that can help many. So to have time for us, again, it's amazing of you to do so. Can you tell everybody, Gerald, where you are in this big world of ours?
I am on the left coast of California, the far left coast. And we have had, it's really impolite for Californians to complain about the weather. But here by the Pacific Ocean, despite whatever might be happening with climate change, we have had the coldest winter. We've just had downright chilly weather, and it's like, where's this balmy, Amalfi Coast of Italy, Mediterranean climate?
Where did it go? Where did it go? Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, there you go. Your background, again, is very deep, a rich history in authorship and creative space. Can you kind of give us an overview, a little bit of your backstory as well, before we jump into talking about some of your writings?
Well, let's see. How far back should we crank? My first writing award, I was in fourth grade. I wrote an essay for the Kansas City Public Library, Why Most People Like Tom Sawyer.
Oh, good.
And I won 2 tickets to The Wizard of Oz. Scholastic magazines, I was in 6th grade. I wrote a short story called The Mayor's Secretary. Now, this is really prescient. This was just about the time that IBM punch card computers came out.
Okay.
And the story was about the mayor of a city hiring a robot instead of his live secretary, his pretty live secretary. Yeah. This was before Me Too, you could make those references. Yeah. And he ended up wanting to fire the robot because the robot, Freudian, wait for this, stole his cigars.
Oh, interesting.
So my dad was a chemical engineer. He was later very much involved in the oil business and somewhat of a depression baby. So he really felt he had to be a big wage earner, and he was. I mean, he did very well for himself. But in his secret life, he wanted to be a history professor. He wanted to write. I didn't realize this until I actually told him in my early high school years, I wanted to write. I didn't want to be a research scientist like he was encouraging me to be. You will never make any money. I didn't raise my son to be an artist. It's like, this is a bad choice. Okay, so we struggled through that. Even worse, when I was in college, besides being in the College of Letters at Wesleyan University, where I studied with Jerzy Kosinski, among other folks, serious stuff, I also acted. I was a semi-pro serious actor for a while. And it wasn't until I'd been rejected by Juilliard after I got out. I auditioned for John Houseman. That was, why do you want to be an actor, sir? And then I made the mistake of answering the question. I didn't realize it's rhetorical. Okay. But I got this realization after I was out in the world looking for work that, if I am an actor, I mean, let's say I did succeed at that in a way, wouldn't I still have to just be waiting for the right script to come to me, the right part to come to me? I mean, did Joaquin Phoenix reach out and say, I want to be the Joker?
Right.
Well, I mean, brilliant choice, but somebody probably said, we've got a great part for you. Mm-hmm. Now, but then I also realized if I was the writer, I get to play all the parts. And one of the things that I have discovered marvelously is that, especially in fiction, and I wrote business and technical books for years, 2 outlines and discipline. But one of the things that I've discovered in writing fiction is starting from a blank page may be terrifying, but it is a marvelous process if you will have faith and stick with it. Because if you can surprise yourself, if I can surprise myself, I have had beta readers, and these are colleagues who are also accomplished writers themselves. I've had beta readers tell me more than once, I could not figure out what was going on until the last page. And I tell them, I said, don't tell anybody. I didn't either. and the other, I know it's like, you're driving without GPS.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you kind of know. I know north. I mean, I'm a farm boy. Okay. Yeah. I know north south. Even if I got turned around, I kind of know. Okay, the ocean's over there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's like how it feels when you start with that blank pages. You kind of know where you want to end up, but you're not really too stressed about how you're going to figure out getting there, because you will as you go. And the marvelous thing is, when you get to that last page, you don't know it's the last page. You just know when you type that last word, you go, oh my God, it's over.
Wow.
And I mean, that's a thrill.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, the times that I did play leading roles as an actor, and that was in summer stock, it wasn't on Broadway, but when I did that, there's a similar kind of thrill to that, that applause stepping out on stage. And it's like, yeah, I guess I reached them somehow. Mm-hmm. I guess I guess they bought it.
Yeah.
I guess they bought who I was. And so that's part of that thrill. No, but just to backtrack just a bit, I trained, if you will, as a business and technical writer. I started out in advertising, very quickly became involved in what they call in Chicago, in what they called industrial film, which was really more corporate sales and training. Okay. And then from there, I was actually an assistant director of training at a large accounting firm, and it was audit and tax. Now, if you want to talk about dry stuff, that was it, because we were basically training staff to be ready for the CPA exam, which is so difficult you have to take it about 4 times.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, but also that's where I got into being a producer, because we had a small staff and I was hired as a writer. I'd come off corporate films, and they said, well, who's actually going to supervise production of this stuff? Because we've got a whole series of, audio tape and video to do. I mean, we've got a whole season's training to get through. We're going to need somebody to produce it. And I said, I'll do that. And let the other guy do the writing. This is boring the pants off of me. So I got into production. I got into, I was supervising audio recording sessions. And it was interesting because right away, I just assumed, and my boss assumed, we needed to audition actors for the voiceover. And it wasn't quite as bad as coaching Dustin Hoffman in What's My Motivation?
Mm-hmm.
But the actors wanted to understand what they were talking about. And, we had to say, guess what? There isn't time to give you an MBA. You're not going to understand this. And even the people who are taking this training don't understand it. And so what we found was the magical choice was that if we got guys from the local TV station who were on-air announcers, who were used to reading like news bulletins at 3 a.m., they were used to reading cold copy.
Yeah.
They had no idea what they were saying.
Yeah.
They had no idea. And one of the things that I encountered recently was that, Amazon and now also, I believe, Apple, for ebooks, they're saying, why don't you try out our beta program for the AI voiceover? Now, there's been robotic reading for, deaf listeners before, and that sounds kind of droning and whatever. I was struck by how realistic these voices sound.
Right.
I mean, really real. And it's like you can pick, the dialect, the sex, the age, the whatever, all this. The thing that I found was that for nonfiction, that's probably, if it's short, if it's a 15-minute lesson, that'll probably work.
Yeah.
For fiction, though, the voice was a bit too, it was almost like a metronome.
Yeah.
Because they're doing exactly the same those on-air announcers were doing. They're simply inflecting, because this is the beginning of the sentence, this is the middle of the sentence. The computer knows how to kind of modulate it. But in terms of, and they might even know stress words and emotions and whatever.
Yeah.
But, in fiction, when you're switching speakers in dialogue, these days in a fiction novel, you don't typically attribute a lot, like he said, she said. Okay, you're just simply alternating, like, especially if it's dialogue between two people, because you're alternating. You get a new set of quotation marks. You know that she's speaking and he's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you have a live narrator, that narrator knows to. It's not necessarily acting. It's more like adding a little bit of dialect or adjusting your tonality so you can adjust the age so that, so it might be a male reader, but the male reader's voice is going to soften a bit when he's reading her lines. Okay. It's not, you're not going to get into falsetto.
Yeah.
You're not going to sing it. So, but that was one of the things. And I was in the beta review for Amazon for those. And I emailed them back and I said, well, you're going to have to, when you see a new set of quotation marks, you're going to have to do something different. And, this might take a little bit more development to make it better, but they might get there.
It's interesting because you mentioned at the beginning that you wrote a story back in school as a child around robots stealing the cigars. And here we are. The robots are now here as AI. Do you see a kind kind of a challenge for authors in a world where you can click a button and have a book given to you?
You know, anytime there's new technology, there's opportunities and there's risks. And I was involved. One of the reasons I could write business and technical books was that as part of my experience in the training world, I got very deeply involved in computer graphics. And I got involved in the internals of it, in the real nuts and bolts of the programming. We were involved in the very first software that later became Harvard Graphics and later became PowerPoint. Okay.
Yeah.
And I have a book called How to Lie with Charts that is still taught in colleges.
I love the name of that book.
I learned from that experience. But one of the things that happened then that I think applies to everything that I've seen since in terms of different milestones is that when we were first making business slides, and they were film slides, but they were produced by computer imaging on the film, the text was a little bit ragged. The resolution was like not quite great. Everything was letter spaced beautifully. I mean, better than you could with press type back then. People used press type.
Yeah.
And, our traditional customers, oh, this is never going to be as good as, manually made, sheet of Pantone and a cutouts and pasted on, and then a cell of white type over that, and then it's all shot on an animation stand. All this is going to sound really strange,
mm-hmm.
right? And that quality, I mean, that's as sharp as Kodak film could record. That is the equivalent of about 3,000 lines in a slide, something like that, which now is routinely exceeded by even IMAX.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but back then it was it'll never be as good. Well, it never was as good for years. But what happened was the computers shrank to laptops. And the laptops, the screens, suddenly became electronic. And the magic was you could hook a wire from the laptop to the screen, and you didn't have to carry around a projector and a tray of slides anymore.
Right.
You just walked into the room, and chances were, if it was a corporate boardroom, it had the screen there already.
Yeah.
And they even had the cord ready. Here, hook up here.
Yeah.
We want to see your presentation. Well, the thing that was really stunning about this was that when that started happening, it dawned on everybody in the business that people were much more interested in the data being fresh than in the quality of the presentation.
Nice.
They wanted the data now. They wanted the content now. And the same would be true of you talk about, yes, it's wonderful to have a printed book. If you're going to go to the beach, you don't want sand in your laptop, okay? But when it really comes down to it, if I'm sitting in the departure gate of Delta Airlines and I'm going to go off on my beach vacation, and I forgot to go to the bookstore, but not only did I forget go to the bookstore, but I don't really know what I want to read.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't have time to browse. Okay, there was this little bookstore at the airport, and then the selection was just not okay. Yeah. I'm sitting in the departure lounge at Amazon. I've got 1 million books to choose from, and my laptops will hold 1,000. Yeah. My tablet will hold 1,000.
Yeah.
I go click, click, click. I'm on the plane, and it's like, wow. Again, I'm thirsty for the content. So there was a big reason why I'm not holding a paperback in my hand.
Right.
And now you can say the same thing about streaming.
Yeah.
And we learned it over COVID. I was still doing a lot of editing and content creation in business proposals, in government contract bids. I mean, this is like deep stuff, okay? a lot of those corporations that I would work for, they refused to have Zoom or back then it was WebEx I think was the only one, was it?
Yeah.
And no, that's not secure. I mean, people could tap into it. I mean, they had all these reasons why they had to fly you to some location and put you in a locked room, and then the pages of your proposal will actually be tacked to the wall so the executive could come in and stroll from the first volume to the last volume of this, 300-page proposal. Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody does it that way.
No.
Since COVID, nobody does.
Yeah.
The computer security has gotten better. Okay. It's unlikely you and I are going to be Zoom bombed during this session. Could happen, but it's unlikely because the protections have gotten better.
Yeah.
But also the other thing that the corporation, it's expensive to fly everybody here.
Right.
And then there's the hotel and the per diem, and then those guys are out of town. They're maybe drinking too much, and then we've got an 8 a.m. call for stand up in the morning, and they're showing up and their eyes are half open. It's like, we could schedule this for 3 a.m. and we could get those knuckleheads to join then, because they know that we've got 3 people in Taiwan and 1 person in Vladivostok.
Yeah.
Okay, it's this whole mindset of what time zone are we in is like not the primary consideration about having a meeting, because hey, that's the only time there. So all I'm saying about technology is that the thirst for what it is and what it does, the consumer demand, if you will, is so much more important than the downside. We will go there. I mean, my wife has a charity that she's founded in Africa, the Elephant Matriarch Project, and it's just getting on its feet. And she's got collaborators in Kenya and here, and elsewhere in the world. And they did their first presentation the other day, and PowerPoint was like my daily life. Okay, I lived this stuff before, and so but here it came, and it's like it wasn't done in PowerPoint. It was done in this thing called Beautiful AI. But the problem was that the people didn't know what file extension that was. Well, no, it isn't a file extension. It's an online app. But it's all about they wanted the content yesterday. That was the quickest way to create it. Then they were discussing it among themselves on Zoom calls. And I said, wait a minute. We've got to be able to at least export this to a PDF. What's that? So the people in the other country who don't have that app or who aren't hooked up to the net can't open that file. So again, it was the thirst for, not only the thirst for the content, but the ability to generate the content attractively and quickly using AI.
Yeah.
So is there a graphic designer who's out of a job because that occurred? Well, if that designer is thinking this is the way it's got to be done, maybe. But if the graphic designer is saying, "Oh, I can do this and I can use this set of new tools, but here's what I bring. Here's the value I bring," and it's like that narration.
Yeah.
It's like I understand. Not only do I know how to train my voice in the studio for radio, but I also modulate on, I can cold read. I have no idea what I'm reading, but I can do that. But I also, as an actor, I understand what preacher Evan Wycliffe is going through here. I understand that this is the dark night of his soul when this other person who knocks on his meager trailer door and brings him a problem nobody else wants to solve. Okay, well, of course, that's when the problem shows up, is when he's feeling his worst, when he's, yes, people accuse him of being a minister of the gospel, who's a doubter. Yeah, like 3 days a week, maybe. Okay, and that's the time the problems show up.
Yeah.
It's,
right.
So, but again, I mean, that's, I think, that's the wonderful thing. There's 4 books in this series. This is the 14th one that's over my shoulder.
Yeah.
And the 14th novel that I've written, the 4 in this Preacher Evan Wycliffe series. But again, that idea of understanding of the emotions almost being between the lines is, I think, marvelous. And I think that's also, you see it, I love cable series because they don't compress the book into, it's what we used to call the Reader's Digest version. Okay.
Yeah.
And I watched a movie the other day that had been adapted from a famous novel. And the thing was that the novel it had a pacing and a thoughtfulness that absolutely did not come across in that movie. And the thing was that writer is not notorious for tearjerkers. There were half a dozen emotional and physical crises in this book.
Yeah.
Sicknesses, deaths, accidents, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you compressed it into 2 hours, it became a soap operatic roller coaster. It was a very emotionally distressing movie. It wasn't an emotionally distressing book because as a book, you just kind of you're reading along. It's like, okay, stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is, life is what happens while you're making other plans. Okay. But in the feature film, it was like, oh, this happened, and then the character's just being whipsawed by this person died, that person got sick, and they wanted to have all those emotional beats so they didn't leave the important parts of the story out. Well, the marvelous thing is, and again, this is technology.
Yeah.
This is what's happened not only with streaming services, but also with COVID and people binge watching, is we've got 13 episodes of Succession in one season, and we've got multiple seasons.
Yeah.
We can take an episode for every chapter. We can feature supporting characters. They can have their own episode.
Yeah.
It's their sub-story, their subplot.
Yeah.
And so we're back to the day. What's old is new again, right?
Yeah.
We're back to the day. Balzac, Dickens, their stuff was syndicated in newspapers, and new episode. What, I don't know, was it daily every week? I didn't live back then, but I have heard stories that there would be people waiting on the dock for the ship to come in to bring them a load of newspapers so they could read the next chapter of Dickens' novel. And that's where we are, is that, and one of the other things that I say about this, that, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I never walked out of a movie theater and said, I really miss those guys. If I've binge watched, it's like there's a hole in my life until I figure out what to watch next.
Right.
It's like, it bothers me. I'm not going to see the characters from Succession again. And not that they were wonderful people. It's also entertaining is that during COVID, my wife and I watched there was a Blood Money Love Turkish television series on, I believe it was on Netflix. There's 156 episodes.
Okay.
And it was like, are we ever going to get through this? And then we got through it. It's like, wow, I wonder if there's any more.
Yeah. When we talk about AI and the fact that AI might seem to be a threat to human authors as we write our story, the one thing, AI is probably the dumbest it'll ever be right now. It's going to get better. It's going to get smarter. But right now, the one thing that AI can't do is capture the human spirit, the love that has been lost, the disappointment, the feeling of losing a job, the emotions behind what we write and how we show up. And from a musical sense, in the music world, what I love is that I find that the beauty of music is found in between the notes, in the gaps, that's where music comes alive for me. And what I love as human authors is we can add in that humanity. We can add in thoughtful pause. We can add in little diversions and little off steps from the story to connect with our readers, where an AI tool currently, where we're at in 2024, can't do to the same extent that a human being can
Well,
do.
certainly if we regard it as a tool.
Right.
And that's the thing. And, you've got a checkbox when you submit an ebook to Amazon. You got a checkbox. Now, did you use AI, in creating this book? And you have to interpret that in a strict technical sense, like, did AI write this book?
Yeah.
Because for years we've been using AI and it was just never labeled that way. If you use Grammarly to check your English, that's a checking. That's not a spell checker. It is a spell checker, but it's also punctuation, style, voice, count on passive sentences, word length, reading level. That's all stuff that a pro developmental editor and pro copy editors would be advising you on. Mm-hmm. And yes, to that extent, it's making those services more accessible. And to the extent that you might hire a human being to do that, that human being is going to have to demonstrate their value add in the future, because, you have to pay attention to, you can't accept 100% of the tips that Grammarly gives you, because some of them are just wrong.
Right.
Or they're wrong for you in that instance. Yeah. But your comment about between the lines, that resonates so much with me. And I have talked in interviews before about how much I revere John le Carré, who was primarily late 20th century author, did publish into the 21st century. But I learned more about not only writing, but also the world and geopolitics from reading between the lines in his books. Right. And one of the things I think that's so marvelous about, and other writers have done this, but I think they never spoke to me as clearly as he did. And when he's writing spy thrillers, he describes spies as close observers. That's like almost a synonym. And George Smiley, the main character of the George Smiley trilogy, and other novels as well. Bumbling middle-aged fellow, but brilliant. Oxford graduate, Oxford, Cambridge, I forget which, but brilliant mind, unassuming fellow, about as different from James Bond as you could possibly imagine. Portly fellow in a raincoat, shuffling down the sidewalk of London, going back to his Chelsea apartment. But the thing about George Smiley is he is such a close observer. On his way back to his apartment, when he gets back, he can tell you the license plate of every car that he passed.
Right.
Now, this might seem to be useless information. And that's the way le Carré salts his books, with what seems like useful information. Yeah. And an elementary example of that is, okay, you are a spy and you have broken into somebody's office, and you're looking. You have no idea what you're looking for, but you're basically just trying to figure out what's going on with this guy.
Yeah.
So le Carré is going to give you the detail about what's on the desktop, what's in the drawers, what are the pictures on the wall, what's the condition of the wallpaper peeling? Okay, what's going on with the financing of this outfit, or I don't think there's dust on it. How long has it been since somebody's been here? Okay, so this is all stuff. It's called exposition by accretion. Okay, you're getting layers. You're getting and some of this stuff is going to be completely useless. But the problem is, later in the book, some element of that's going to be crucially important, and you had better remember all of it, because he's not going to tell you.
Right.
So the thing that really was a revelation to me, and it might seem very basic, is what is a reader but a close observer? And then I began to realize is John le Carré is training me how to read. He's training me how to write. Okay? And the stuff that's between the lines he's got some pretty heavy geopolitical stuff where, it was pretty clear that, it's a gray area as to how much he was involved in the actual spy community. He might have been under diplomatic cover in Germany when he was stationed there. Oh, he couldn't talk about it. Everything had to be cleared. Okay, fine. But he was also, it's very clear that false flag operations, almost always a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking you can manipulate some geopolitical situation by pretending to be someone you're not as a country, or as an operative, as an intelligence organization. And he's really, you can tell, he's really smoldering in anger about Brexit, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a Brit and a loyal Brit, and his heart was just really into hope for the European community, the EU, and the fact that after all these world wars that had happened, like between those countries, and the way that everybody had been like sucked into all the differences in language and culture, and I mean, and this is one of the things that I found, like, living in Kenya. My wife and I lived there for 2 years, again, as part of her charitable work. And most of Kenya is 80% Christian, 20% Muslim. But we lived on the coast there in the Indian Ocean, and that part of the coast is exactly the opposite. It's 80% Muslim.
Hmm.
And it was amazing how many intermarried couples there were there. It's like, okay, our houseman was Kenyan, and he's Catholic, and it turns out his wife is a housekeeper over in Saudi Arabia because she's making more money there, and she's Muslim.
Yeah.
And it became pretty clear that, well, the God is the U.S. dollar. It's like the thing you need to know is if you're a white person from America, United States, or Europe, and you're traveling there, you're not a resented colonialist returning. You are either a tourist there to spend money or a businessman there to invest money. Okay, their money is in your pocket. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, economic opportunity is the one thing that just simply causes people to kind of put the guns down and say, listen, don't mess with my business.
Yeah.
Don't mess with my income. But if you've got privation, if people are starving, if people, then, and that's a whole other part of the story.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the Preacher series. I'm curious. We chatted before we jumped on that there could be more coming in the future, which I'm excited about. But what's the origin story for your series around this preacher? And is there a real connection to a preacher that sparked this, or is this completely...
Well, there's a very real connection to my background as growing up as a Southern Baptist, and my family having its roots in Southern Missouri, where this book is set, or this series of books is set. I was a student minister briefly in high school. That was part of that whole transition of scientist, writer, minister, whatever. But the main character, Evan Wycliffe, I pattern on, I don't know, maybe it's how it might have turned out for me. He goes to Harvard Divinity School thinking he's going, which is a notoriously Unitarian trans-denominational institution.
Yeah.
But he thinks he's going to be a minister. And, very rapidly he finds out enough about the history of the Christian church. It's like, no, I'm sorry. That's just, racism, the Inquisition, oppression, the Crusades, World Wars. No, this is just, give me the church, give me Christ without the church. Okay. Mm-hmm. But not the other way around. Mm-hmm. So he drops out of Harvard Divinity. Then because he's got the scientist thing, here we go. He's got the scientist in talents and pre-calc. He enrolls in MIT astrophysics, And then, fascinating, but then he realizes, guess what? As much as is understood these days, there's still no ultimate answers here.
Yeah.
And I'm just not feeling satisfied. So he at that point, he's disappointed in love as well. There's a loss, a really severe loss in his life. And so he decides to return to Southern Missouri, where this is a depressed zone. This is family farming that's kind of gone to seed. And the big thing in Missouri these days is the tourist industry. They're around the Lake of the Ozarks, sport fishing, casinos. There's a little further south, Branson, Nashville clone.
Yeah.
Okay. But, that's what's growing. But I mean, there's also, as in rural America, meth labs, depression, homelessness, and a shortage of jobs. So when he comes back, he can get work as a guest preacher, and he can get work as a bill collector because he's a data driller. You don't need to be a gumshoe to run down defaulted debtors these days. All you need to do is, you've got your tools on your computer. You can nail them pretty much right away. So he knows, but then he ends up negotiating win-win deals. The dealer kind of resents, because it's like there's this one episode where the dealer says, there's this really hot Mustang, and the guy, he hasn't paid in 3 months. Says, I want you to go and bring that car back. So Evan takes a loan. Evan doesn't have his own car. He borrows a loaner. And so it's this kind of beat up Taurus. Okay. He's driving. It's a Ford dealer. Beat up Taurus. He's driving to, near the local army base. And it turns out that the cosigner on the loan is this woman, and she's just recently out of the military. And he tracks her down pretty easily. He finds her, watering her lawn in this modest little house. And he says, I've come for the Mustang. And she says, well, good luck finding it. My boyfriend took off in it. And, the only reason I co-signed was because he couldn't afford the car. And he says, well, that's kind of unfortunate. You're stuck. I mean, and because he's not coming back, and we're probably not going to be able to find that car. And she says, yeah, I can't even get to work. And I end up having to beg rides from people. So he says, well, this car I came in, it'll kind of get you from here to there. Could you afford this? She says, well, what's a Ford? He says, $100 a month. And she says, oh, yeah, I could do that. And he says, sign here. He says, I'll get a ride home.
Wow.
So, win-win, right? I mean, this your hard-ass bill collector, it's not going to think of this, okay? It's not going to go that extra mile. But, and now he's got a new best friend.
Yeah.
And so people do come to him with the problems that nobody else wants to solve. And the very first book in the series, Preacher Finds a Corpse, does go back to my family history. And I had a relative who died by suicide by his own gun. And it was just, I won't say impossible, but unthinkable as to why this would have happened. Mm-hmm. And so that was actually the triggering incident, if you will. I have Evan finding his boyhood best friend dead in a frozen cornfield soon after he's returned to Missouri to work as a guest preacher. And so the question is, maybe not who did it, because it certainly looks like a self-inflicted wound, and the sheriff goes, hey, suicide case closed. The authorities aren't really interested in it anymore. Mm-hmm. But Evan's really driven to who would lead him to this? What circumstances what was oppressing him? Who or what was oppressing him that he felt that this would solve anything?
Yeah.
And so, as the family history, I mean, I nobody knows the full story of what happened back then, even still. So this was my fictionalized working through what might have been.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not accusing any of whatever, but there was a family estate that was being settled at the time. There was a farm that was in the estate, and and the inheritance had to be figured out for that farm. Well, the problem was that my research showed in that part of the world, especially for farmland that had been in the family for generations, there is likely to be no proof of ownership. That was Indian. That was Osage Indian land that they were chased off of in the 1830s, and the feds gave people, sharecropper rights and invited immigrants to come in. And my family were Swiss, primarily Swiss and German immigrants to that part of the world.
Yeah.
But then the Civil War came along, and that part of Missouri is no man's land. Was no man's land. And Union troops, the guys in blue, came into the farmhouses and said, by the way, you guys are going to have to find another place to live for a while. So people were turned out of their homes because they felt as though this was going to be a conflict zone, and they didn't want anybody in the middle of the cannon fire and the rifle shot.
Yeah.
Well, after the war, people go back, and there's people sitting in your house.
Yeah.
Now, who go in the middle of a war, who takes off and says, by the way, do we have the title papers with us?
Right.
Oh, well, we don't have any title papers. Oh, well, but Granddad had, the feds, we're sharecropper. We've been here since, never mind, who can prove they own this place?
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. And so in my family, the end of the true story was my great aunt, it was her place, but she hadn't farmed it for 15 years in her old age. I mean, she lived to like 92. She wasn't able to farm that land. So there were tenant farmers. There was a nice family living in there. A bunch of kids feeding the chickens every morning, and they were paying rent to her. Well, what they did to resolve the estate was they deeded to the farm to the tenants. They've been there for 10 years. I mean, who deserves it more than them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the family doesn't. Yeah, the family. There are no farmers in the family. They would just sell the place. But the problem is, if you sell the place, title company's going to go, you don't have the rights to sell the place.
Right. Yeah. So
the deed says, to the extent that we own this place, it's yours for $1. Okay, so if you ever decide to sell it, the problem is yours and not ours.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that worked with the IRS. There was a little controversy there over whether that was, but that was based. I think that was some country lawyer's solution. But that got this book started, and of course, it turned in my fictionalized story. There was a land grab where there were developers who really wanted this land, and there was a really powerful reason why they wanted it, and it wasn't a righteous reason, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that secret is kind of at the core of that plot.
Yeah.
So in the second book, Preacher Fakes a Miracle, Evan befriends a teenage boy who has schizophrenia and who has been accused of raping one of the other young people in the facility that he's been institutionalized at, and she has epilepsy. Well, the thing is, she then goes missing. So, not only is she pregnant by who, staff member, him, whatever, but she's also been kidnapped. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah.
So Evan gets sucked into this. It's like, okay, again, a problem nobody else wants to solve. I mean, these are what? Disturbed kids, witchcraft. I mean, demons possessing. I mean, that part of the world, mental illness is not exactly treated with what you might call the most sympathetic reception.
Yeah.
So he's befriending these kids, and nobody else is. So, and the preacher fakes a miracle because Evan finds a rather creative way to deal with these these accusations of witchcraft and possession by demons. Mm-hmm. So then in the third book, Preacher Raises the Dead, Evan has married the sister of this woman that he's rescued, if you will. And she had been, she was an educated woman, a sympathetic woman. She'd been a cocktail waitress at the casino. It was the only job she could find. And she was aware of some of this corruption that was going on. But, she accepted his proposal. He thought that she was a really sincere person, and she was. The problem was that once he married her, this was during COVID. And the pastor of the church, of the First Baptist, has retired. This wise old black fellow who'd been Evan's mentor, okay, substitute father figure, okay. Yeah. But he says, Evan, I can't deal with this anymore. You're going to have to be you're going to have to step in, be the minister. The last thing Evan would have volunteered for, okay. But here he is during COVID. Yeah. He's going to have to visit the sick and the dying. He's going to have to officiate at not only weddings, but also funerals. Yeah. So he's going to have his hands full of misery. Okay. Well, the other thing that happens is that his new bride, not only does she step into the role of minister's wife, but she's like more of a church lady than a church lady. Suddenly she's wearing these conservative dresses, and she's head of the Loving Embrace Committee, is delivering hot meals and also visiting the sick and praying with people's bedsides and whatever. But it turns out it's like too much stress for her. Mm-hmm. As much as, he was kind of prepared for it. He knew what was involved. She didn't really know what was involved. She just wanted to be a good wife. Yeah. And so, but the thing is that suddenly she's in a devastating auto accident. And she's in a coma. And there he is. One of the people he's got to be visiting regularly is his wife is hooked up to this equipment. And the one thing, again, small spoiler alert, the one thing that he decides to do, because the doctors have said, we don't know if she's going to come out of this. We don't know how much consciousness she's got. There's brain activity there, but we don't really know whether she understands anything that you say. She certainly can't see you. She's on a respirator. She's being fed intravenously. And so I had to research all that, the legality around that and whatever. But Evan visits her every day. And, he may just sit there, but, then he realized, okay, well, I can read to her. I'll read to her. I'll sing to her. But then there's one thing that he realized. He said, there's one thing I can do that the doctors haven't thought of. He says, there's this old sweatshirt I used to wear for chores on Saturday morning. I'm never going to wash it. So every time he goes to see her, he's in that sweatshirt. He says, maybe she'll know I'm here. Mm-hmm. Because, what's more primitive than the sense of smell? Mm-hmm. So, again, you're in this mystery. You're in this whodunit. And then there's the whole thing about, was this auto accident staged? Was some? There are other reasons why people are out to get Evan, or was she politically depressed at this point and she drove her car into something? There's a whole swarm of thoughts that Evan is using to try to work his way through this mystery. That's something of the core mystery. Mm-hmm. There's more complications to it. But also, one of the things about these books is you've got this dramatic engine of, why is there evil in the world? Mm-hmm. Why do bad things happen to good people? Yeah. So in this last book, which might be the most controversial, you've got a cult leader who is, like other televangelists, like other people who've had mass followings, is preaching the end times. This is not against the law. Okay? And here in southern Missouri, he's got a compound, and he's inviting the homeless and the disadvantaged. Come, I'll feed you. I'll take care of you. I mean, it's like the Salvation Army. Okay, the soup kitchen. You're gonna need to listen to the choir sing, but you have to come and so people are flocking there. But it's amazing to me when I was writing that third book, Preacher Raises the Dead, right during COVID and right after, I thought, should I even mention COVID in this book? Because by the time this book is out, COVID's going to be so yesterday. People just don't want to know about it. And I thought, no, if I was writing a book in 1950 and World War II had just ended, you can't deny that happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You can't pretend that it didn't exist and everything's all right now, because both good and bad. The 50s was a period of widespread consumerism, a lot of money in people's pockets, the GI Bill, people becoming much more college educated, people moving to the suburbs and wanting refrigerators and washing machines and not only one car, but maybe the second car. Yeah. I mean, the war did that. Now, it was a hell of a price to pay for that. And if at the beginning of the war, you would say, okay, if we want economic prosperity, should we have this war and these millions of people dying? Nobody would have been able to offer you that choice. Nobody would have wanted that choice.
Right.
But so COVID got us into these Zoom meetings as a daily thing. Okay, that's one thing that it did. Okay, it got us into companies did not used to. They were very uncomfortable with contract labor. The government still is, because it's hard to track. If you have an employer, it's much easier to force them to give you health care and to track your wages and the income tax you owe, and monitor your bank accounts or whatever they want to do in order to make sure that the taxes get paid. But I've been working 100% as a freelancer for it's been a couple of decades. Even way before COVID, and I like the idea of I don't have any one boss. Mm-hmm. I do have different bosses from time to time, and some of them have been jerks, some of them have been very, very sympathetic, and I like self-publishing from that example. We don't call it self-publishing so much in the small press world. We might call it indie publishing. All my books are out on my imprint, but my imprint is La Puerta Books and Media. And yes, there are a couple of other authors who are in that book list, but I haven't rolled out the red carpet and said, send me your manuscripts, I'll publish your book. That's not in the business that I'm doing, because I'm just like, it might be fun if I had a couple extra $1 million to run a publishing company. Mm-hmm. But I run my little company like a big publishing company because I've learned how to do that. Yeah. Because I've learned that I need to do that just simply to have credibility, and I'm not just simply cranking out mysteries from my kitchen table to amuse myself. Right. And it's part of being serious as a writer. And then also with social media, I have a Substack blog, Thinking About Thinking. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you have a traditional publishing deal, fiction or nonfiction these days, unless you have a following as a celebrity or as a household word, a publisher is going to expect you to do the same amount of self-promotion as you would have done if you were self-publishing. Yeah. So that's the first hard lesson for a newbie author to know. The other thing, and I'll open my kimono and tell you why my blog Thinking About Thinking exists, is one of the things that I have learned in book marketing is publishing this title or any other. Yes, I may have an interview and it might have to do with publishing this book, but my career as an author has less to do with selling this book than it has to do with making you aware of my name.
Mm.
I know that I really respect Paul Auster's work as a fiction writer. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure that I can name all the books that I've read by him.
Yeah.
Okay? But I know if he comes out with something new, I want it.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's other authors like that. Now, yeah, there's certain titles that I was drawn to, but Michel Houellebecq he publishes in French, he's translated in English. One of the reasons I began to read him was that other authors in their blogs had said, that's what I'm reading now.
Yeah.
Thinking, yes, I will review books, and I will review books that I think that are primarily literary fiction because they're more difficult to find in terms of like, if you're finding genre, you can probably find the bestsellers, but literary fiction, you kind of have to look for it to find stuff that you really want or that you're attracted to. And so I'm into if you like this, you might also like me business.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily review new releases. I mean, I had a very serious review of Stendhal's Red and the Black. That was 1814, the first psychological novel, because there are interior monologues in the Red and the Black. Up to that point, writers didn't try that or do that or even know what it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the interior monologue of the main character. He was jumping inside other people's heads and telling you what they thought. He didn't know there was a rule. Okay. Stendhal was the one who said the people in Paris are smarter than the people. What? Not smarter. People in Paris, because they're not smarter. People in Paris are wiser than the people in the rural areas because they've read novels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is that? Because they can see the consequences of bad behavior.
Yes. Right.
The people on the farm, where are they going to get that? They might get it in the priest's lesson on Sunday. Well, they don't pay attention to that, and the church has told them they can't read the Bible, so they can't read the lessons of the Bible for themselves, and they might ignore that anyway because they go, well, that was then, this is now. But if they read a Balzac novel, cheating on your wife could be a bad strategy.
Yes. I love
Telling lies about your neighbor could get you into some serious trouble.
And we talked about this at the beginning. I said, we're going to get into some stuff today. It's going to be so nice and deep. I love this. This is amazing. I want to send people to the website as well, Gerald. Can you tell us about the website, what we're going to find there when we get there? And
GeraldEverettJones.com, and you can see how it's spelled here. And, I shy away from Jerry Jones. I don't own the Dallas Cowboys. It's, that rumor needs to be quashed. Don't ask for me for money because I'm spending all of mine on book promotion.
I love it. I love it.
But GeraldEverettJones.com, if you go there, actually, you're going to find complimentary ebook review copies. I mean, if you're, and I'm not, I would love it if you'd review it and post a review on Amazon. That's how authors get promoted. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'm also just simply, one of the other things that I've embraced is it's not about book sales per se. It's not about selling books to pay for what it costs to produce them, promote them, hustle them, whatever. It is about a fan base. Yeah. It is about the number of people in the world who not only know your name, right, know my name, but who might have been somehow influenced by something that they read.
Right.
I mean, 100 years, somebody once asked me, and it might have been you, so I'll admit that. Somebody once, they said, well, what is your definition of success as a fiction writer? And I said, I'll give you a definition that will surprise you. 100 years from now, if any one of my books is in an English teacher's syllabus, that is success. And I'm gonna say, and I don't want to dump on anybody, James Patterson has sold more mystery novels than anybody. And I want to say, at last report, he's made like $350 million from selling mysteries. He's got a house in Palm Beach, right next to Jeffrey Epstein, who doesn't own that house anymore. And actually wrote a book about Epstein, different story. Yeah. But I venture to say, though, James Patterson's books, as gripping as they are, as well crafted as they are formulaic police procedures. Now, he might think that that's an offensive description, but I would think I'm gonna bet you there's a better chance that Preacher Stall's The Second Coming is going to be in somebody's reading list than the last James Patterson.
Nice.
Now, I won't be there to take that bet, but I'm just gonna use that to characterize what my books aspire to. Because actually, he admitted this in his masterclass. Take James Patterson's masterclass. He'll tell you how to write mystery fiction, and he'll tell you how he works with collaborators, and he works to strict outlines. And he'll say, "I'm not a stylist. My books have motivating plots, and they're page turners, they're grippers." And I will say, I'm a very deliberate stylist. And actually a blurb that I've put on my books is one of my colleagues, Marvin J. Wolf, who wrote the Rabbi Ben mystery series. Plug for Marvin. Marvin said, this is literary fiction disguised as mystery. So yes, I expect my books to make you think. I'm not going to give you any. There's a huge shortage of answers there. But you might stay awake kind of wondering about, what's going on.
I love a book that makes me think.
Well, and that's a feature, not a flaw, I would say. Yeah. But can't sleep. Those darn novels. Geez.
Amazing. Gerald, thank you so much for making time for me. You've been so gracious with your time today. I told everybody it's going to be a masterclass, and you're going to have to listen to this again because there's so much gold here that you need to uncover. And again, the beauty's in between the notes, right? In between the lines. So chase that as an author. And if you're looking for a series and an author to fall in love with, a name that's going to stick with you and keep you up at night, Gerald Jones is here. Gerald, thank you.
Dave, thank you to you and your audience, your fan base, for appreciating those distinctions.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. All the information will be in the show notes for Gerald. Check out his Substack as well, and follow the journey. There's a lot here that you can pick up and learn, and as an author, things you can apply to your journey as well. So again, Gerald, thank you so much. Hey, well, thank you for listening. It's a new year, and we're excited to be releasing even more great episodes of Living the Next Chapter. And we want you to come along for the journey. Thank you for being here. If you know of an author that you would love to have featured on the podcast, an author that you enjoy, an author that brings you that excitement, that you would just love to hear them interviewed on this podcast, I would love to hear your suggestion for a future guest. And what would be a question or two that you would want us to ask them on your behalf? Go to livinginthenextchapter.com. There's a little speak pipe icon there. You can leave me a voice message. Tell me who should be on the show and give me some question ideas. And I'll use your request and reach out to that author and invite them on and give you full credit for the idea. livingthenextchapter.com. Would love to hear your suggestion, and thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode.